Good evening, everybody. This is going to be our last class analyzing the mitzvah of reading the Megillah with specific application to women and the reading of the Megillah, the scroll of Esther. We had seen that the source for this mitzvah of Kriyat HaMegillah, reading the Megillah, if you'll take a look at your source sheets over here, so it's from the Megillah itself, not surprising. Where the Megillah says, that these days are going to be remembered and done in every generation. What does that mean, to be remembered and done? So the sages, it recorded in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, not in the Babylonian Talmud, say that what do those two terms mean? That these days will be remembered and done. And so let's take a look at what it says here. Mahu niskarim v'nasim. What does it mean that these days will be remembered and done? Nizkarim bakriya, that they will be remembered through reading, meaning the mitzvah of chanting the Megillah. And this is typical. Whenever it says in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, that something is supposed to be remembered, we do that by reading from a passage. So, for instance, as we pointed out last week, the mitzvah to remember Amalek, which is actually related to Purim. How do we do that? By reading the passage in the Torah, which talks about Amalek. When the Torah says, remember Shabbat, what do? We take a glass of wine in our hands and we chant. We read a passage which involves part of it coming from Tanakh, part of it coming from Hebrew scripture, which talks about Shabbat. So the idea of remembering something we do by reminding ourselves. The Hebrew word for remember and to remind are the same word. Zayin, Chaf, Resh, those three Hebrew letters. So lizkor means to remember. Lahazkir means to remind it, because it comes up to your memory, jogs your memory, right? And you do that by reading something. So that's not surprising at all. What does it mean that these days will be na'asim done? That's the party part. Okay, so these two major mitzvot that these days the Megillah says are to be remembered. We do that by chanting the Megillah, and done, that's the parting aspect. Fine. We pointed out last week that this mitzvah of reading the Megillah, when you look at it in the spectrum of all of the mitzvot, all of the customs that we do in Jewish life, it occupies a very unique position, because generally speaking, we have this kind of bipartite division. Is there such a word? If there's a word as tripartite, I guess there could be a bipartite.
Yeah, two parts.
Yeah. So, and that is, there are mitzvot that are in the Torah. In Aramaic, we call that deoraita, from the Torah, deoraita. And there's mitzvot which were legislated by the sages. We call that rabbanan. Okay. That's basically the two sources of authority and the two sources of the practices that we do. And they're customs, but that's a different category. Now, this mitzvah of reading the Megillah, well, is it from scripture or not? Well, interestingly enough, it comes from scripture in the sense that it's in the Bible. It's just not in the big five, right? It's not in the 5 books, right? It's from the latter part of the Tanakh, of Hebrew scripture. And what's fascinating is that we find some of the commentators that refer to it as divrei nevi'im, the words of the prophets. We even see that Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, calls it ke'ein deraita. It's like a mitzvah from the Torah. So we discussed this at length last week, and you can check the video if you're interested in further explanation. But that we basically came to the conclusion, and we have some medical experts in this room, that it is basically a rabbinic commandment on steroids. We live in an era of steroids. Okay, so it's a rabbanan on steroids. Okay, now, what about women? Are women obligated in this particular mitzvah? Now, generally speaking, we would say mitzvah, women are obligated in mitzvot. So let's take a look at a passage in the Talmud Yerushalmi. I'm sorry, in the Talmud Bavli, regular Talmud. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, you see where we are, the third source down. Nashim chayavot b'mikra Megillah. Women were obligated in the reading of the Megillah. She'af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, because they were included in that same miracle. They were included in the miracle. It's a very famous passage in the Talmud. Now, there's a lot to say about this. Let's first start out by just trying to understand, what does that term mean, that the women are obligated to read the Megillah because they were included in the miracle? Well, what does that mean? I don't know. Let's open it up to the Council of Torah sages here. What does it mean they're included in the miracle?
I'm perplexed.
You're perplexed?
Yes, because women are not obligated to, on Shabbat, to hear a scroll read, Torah.
So you're suggesting that you know of many mitzvot that women aren't obligated in. Why should they be obligated in this mitzvah?
That require reading the text.
Okay, so that's a very good question. You're actually a little bit ahead of me, because the very fact that the Talmud said that women are obligated in this mitzvah, and I'll tell you why, because they were included in the miracle, means that if it weren't for this passage in the Talmud, what might you have thought by default? That for one reason they're not obligated. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So I'm going to ignore that issue just for a moment and focus on just what does it mean they were included in the miracle? In what way they included in the miracle?
The miracle was the salvation of the Jewish people from the destruction of Haman's plan.
Good. So the women were included in the salvation. So if you take a look at skip one source, this is a anthology of commentaries on the Talmud coming from France and Germany from the 12th to the 14th century. And we call it Tosafot. Tosafot means additional commentaries. And the Tosafot says the following: Lekach nirali sha'af hein hayu b'safek lahashmid ularog. That they were also included in this sword of Damocles that was hanging. He doesn't use exactly that that image there, but the sword of Damocles that was hanging over the Jewish people's head, that they have been destroyed. And so the celebration is obviously includes the women, because they were also part of the salvation. Okay. However, there's another approach, and someone may have looked ahead or behind in this particular case. Okay, very good, Marganit. So if this is from the Rashbam is a wonderful commentator on the Torah and on the Talmud. He happens to have very good yichus because his Zayda was Rashi. Okay, Rashi only had daughters, and those daughters married very fine rabbis, of course. And one of the children of one of those daughters was the Rashbam. Okay, and he wrote this comment on the Talmud here, where he says, what does it mean they were included in the miracle? So he says the following: that ikar nes haya ayadan b'furim ayadei Esther. It's not just that they were included in the salvation, but something more fundamental that happens to be that a woman is the central heroine of the entire story. That it's not that they're beneficiaries of the miracle, that a woman is the causal agent for this miracle to take place. So says the Rashbam. And for that reason, they're obligated. Now along comes Dr. Zlotlo, and he's, oops, this is going out to millions of people, and now they know who you are. I don't know. This could go on. When you run for president, someone's going to say, didn't you once on March 9th?
Nobody can spell my last name.
Yeah, that's true. So I think you're safe. Okay. So Dr. Zlotlo says, but why would we have thought, or he actually said it a little differently, why don't we just assume that they, in fact, are not obligated? So I just want to say it slightly differently. Why did the Talmud have to tell us that there's a special reason that they're obligated? Meaning, if it wasn't for that passage of the Talmud, we would have thought that they are not obligated. Why would you just assume, like Marta's over there, as a default, that women shouldn't be obligated in this mitzvah? So let's take a look. We're going to look at a Mishnah. And the Mishnah says the following: V'chol mitzvot aseh shehazman grama. Is a very famous principle in Talmudic law, that all positive mitzvot, which are time bound, that means they have to be done in a particular time, okay? And that they're positive, meaning it's a do as opposed to a don't. In other words, don't eat cheeseburgers. Obviously, everybody is don't murder. right? Women are obligated in that prohibition.
With one exception, doing the laundry on Sunday.
Aha! You know, your wife is sitting next to you. You got to be very careful here. Okay. In any case, so if it's a do as opposed to a don't, and it's time, but it has to be done in a specific place. So the Mishnah says, chayavim, anashim chayavim, men are obligated in those types of mitzvot, v'nashim piturot, and women are not obligated. They're not coerced to do those. They're exempt from the obligation. Doesn't mean they can't do it. Just means that they're exempt from the coercive obligation to carry out that mitzvah. And then the Mishnah goes on, v'chol mitzvot aseh shelo azman grama, a positive mitzvah, which is not time-bound. It could be done any time. Echad anashim v'echad nashim chayavim. Then there's no distinction between men and women. Okay, fine.
Megillat Esther is bound to 5 times.
Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. The reading of the Megillah is a positive mitzvah. It's a do. Thou shalt read the Megillah. Number 1. Number 2, it's, well, I guess that's number 1 is enough. It's a positive time-bound mitzvah. Right? It's positive, it's a do, and it's time-bound. It has to be done at specific times. So therefore, you might have thought, I guess women are not obligated in that mitzvah. They could do it, but they're not obligated. And therefore, the Talmud Kabbalah says, that's what you would have thought, but not so fast, Kowalski. Okay, that because they were included in the same miracle, either because of the centrality of Esther or because they're included in the threat of destruction, they are obligated when you would have normally thought as default assumption that they're not. Yes, sir.
But within the 24-hour period of Purim,
Yes,
the Megillah is read at least a couple times.
Yeah.
In case of here, 3.
Oh, very good question.
So,
Notice you're asking, what does it mean? What does it mean time bound? Because you're asking. There's a lot of hours there in which you have the option of reading the Megillah. It's a very good question. So time bound can mean it's a certain day of the year. So since you can't read it on March 18th, well, I guess March 9th, right? So that's called time bound, right? So it doesn't mean bound to certain hours within the day.
Okay.
It could be that it's limited to a certain day in the year. That's also called time bound. Yes, Marguerite.
You don't need a milah for the Megillah Esther, and you do for the Torah, right?
Okay, that's actually a little bit of a sensitive question. Not politically sensitive, but you're going to see from today, nothing is simple.
I was just wondering.
This is one of my themes.
The time.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is obviously not everybody in the 21st century. I think that's where we are nowadays, right? This is not always comfortable for everybody, these kinds of ideas of distinction between genders in terms of Jewish law. So don't bother me, okay, everybody? Okay? We're just here to see the sources. And as soon as the class is over, you can go out and scream at the top of your lungs that this is unfair or sexist or anything like that. But for now, I just want to see what the sources are. Now, I'd like to ask the question, where does this principle come from that women are not obligated to perform mitzvot which are positive and time-bound? Well, the Talmud asked that very question. So let's take a look at the second page. So the Talmud says the following, Minalan, from where do we know that women are exempt from positive time-bound mitzvot? Now, before I answer that question by reading the Talmud here, I have to tell you something. Whenever the Talmud derives a law from verses in the Torah, you just have to know that it's often hard to fully appreciate the logic behind it. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, one of the great medieval philosophers, wrote this book called Kuzari, which is a discussion between this non-Jewish king who wants to convert to monotheism and then he decides he'll become Jewish. And rabbi, that's kind of the setup of the book. So it's a good kind of literary format for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, this great philosopher, to tell you his opinion about, or his understanding of basic Judaism. He has the king ask the question. You know, I got the Art Scroll Talmud, and I was looking through it, and I saw these derivations of laws based upon what you guys, I think, call Midrash, and a little bizarre. And Rabbi Yehuda Levi answers, and he says, you know, I guess the rabbis of the Talmud knew what they were doing and had some kind of insight into a process of derivation that we no longer have. So what I find fascinating about that answer is the answer basically is an admission that these are very difficult to understand. I'll take it one step further. Many times, these types of derivations may be slightly misleading. That is, the Talmud will often derive a law from the Torah. And then the Talmud will say, you can't derive it from that verse for whatever reason. I know of examples in the Talmud where the Talmud will say, where do we know this particular law? And the Talmud will say, well, from this verse. And then the Talmud will say, wait a second, this whole law is only rabbinic. How can you derive it from a verse? If it was derived from a verse, it would have been a biblical mitzvah. So the Talmud says, just joking. It's a smach de ba'alma. A smach de ba'alma means we're just using the verse as a kind of literary hook to hang this mitzvah on. It doesn't necessarily mean that this law was actually derived. Like the rabbis were reading these verses and were compelled by logic to come to a certain conclusion that it's a good way of remembering it by associating it with verses, or perhaps maybe that there's some kind of hidden allusion with an A in those verses to what later would become a mitzvah by legislated by the rabbis, etc. So don't lose too much sleep over this. I can tell you in yeshivas, we spend very little time trying to understand these derivations. Okay? So let's read the derivation now that I gave you that big Surgeon General's warning. It says the following. So how do we know that women are exempt from positive time bar mitzvot? Gemar mitfilin. We know it from tefillin. The mitzvah tefillin. You might say, what the heck does tefillin have to do with anything we're talking about? Well, you're going to find out. Ma tefillin nashim peturot. Just like we know that women are exempt, they're not obligated from putting on tefillin. Av kol mitzvot aseh shazman grama nashim peturot. So to any mitzvah which is like tefillin, women are exempt. Now, what qualities of tefillin are we talking about? Now, tefillin are a mitzvah which is done in particular hours of the day. And it's a do. Thou shalt put on tefillin, right? So it's a positive bar mitzvah, and since only men are obligated in tefillin, so too only men are obligated in any mitzvah like tefillin in that respect. So then the Talmud goes on and says, wait a second, how do I know that only men are obligated in tefillin? Utfilin gamar la me Talmud Torah. And tefillin, we know that only men are obligated because of its being associated with the mitzvah of learning Torah. How so? Ma Talmud Torah nashim peturot. Just like when it comes to the learning of Torah, women aren't obligated in that mitzvah. Af tefillin, so too tefillin, nashim peturot, women are not obligated. So it goes like this. It's kind of like a 3-step series. So we'll go to the first step. Women are not obligated to learn Torah. They're actually obligated to learn practical things, but they don't have to study Talmud. They don't have to learn Daf Yomi, right? You know, in Alon Shvut, we have a women's Daf Yomi. It's unbelievable. Women who study a page of Talmud every single day. It's incredible commitment. And these are women with their mothers. I mean, they're busy in jobs and they somehow do that amazing thing. They've gone through the Talmud already several times, 7-year cycle. In any case, so women are exempt from that mitzvah. Now, how do I know women are exempt from that mitzvah? Well, because it says in the Shema, Vishinantam levanecha, and you should teach them to your sons. If you translate the word levanecha, you can understand it to mean sons. So you should teach them to your sons. So women are not obligated, but they are obligated, just as an aside, to learn the practical aspects. Okay, you want to study Talmud, that's okay, but in terms of obligation. Now, in the same juxtaposition or juxtaposed to in the Shema, the same passage in the Shema says, put on tefillin. So the same passage in the Shema talks about Vishinam Vanecha, teach your children Torah, your sons Torah, and it talks about tefillin, same context. So that association, only men are obligated in tefillin because of association with Torah, learning Torah. And then Any mitzvah which is like tefillin, which is positive time bound, women are exempt. So that is the, I don't want to call it derivation, because I'm not so sure it's derived that way. It's hard to know. But that's at least the scriptural passage which is associated with this idea of women being exempt from positive time bound mitzvah. Now I want to go and ask one step further question, and that is, what is the logic behind this particular principle that women are exempt from positive time bound mitzvah? So I want to make sure we finish this tonight. So I think I'll just paraphrase. There are two famous approaches, and that is the following. The first approach is called shalom bayit, domestic peace. Why? You know, if you're a mitzvah man, so you got things you have to be done very specific at times, right? There's certain mitzvot that it's like now, right? You know what the problem is? That's very hard to tell a woman who presumably is going to be also a mother. You know, I'm sorry, you just have to you know, the dinner which is cooking now and the laundry over there and the 10 kids that are running around in diapers making a mess and, hubby, could you just take over? Because I got to go and put on tefillin, whatever the case may be. So that's what one of the famous approaches is for shalom bayit. The way that this particular commentator, the Abu Darham, says it, he says, you know, if a woman was obligated in these positive time-bound mitzvot, you know what happened? So it would be, if she would say, my allegiance is to God, so I'm going to drop everything and go put on tefillin. So oila mi ba'ala, woe unto her from her husband. They're going to be fighting all the time. It's going to be a mess. On the other hand, if she says to God, I'm sorry, God, I don't got any time. I know you're obligated me to put on tefillin, but I'm like completely overwhelmed with all the things I got to do domestically. So oila mi yotzra, woe unto her from the way God, because God told her to put on tefillin, right? If that would have been the case. So you know what God did? Lefichach patra haborei mimitzvotav. So God said, you know what? I'd rather have peace in the house than have you do all these things, right? God gives it. Okay, it says focus on the home. Okay, that's one explanation. The other famous explanation, Rav Hirsch explains, the famous rabbi in the 19th century in Germany, and he says, it's a very famous idea. You know why these positive time-bound mitzvot, they're very different than the prohibitions. See, it's not just that prohibitions are don'ts and the positive time-bounds are do's. Don'ts stop you from doing bad things. Do's are there to teach you something, to inculcate a certain idea. These are all very symbolic. Tefillin, right? One of the famous explanation, we put it on the arm and on the head. That's to remind us to use our capacity for action. That's the arm to serve God, and put it on the head to use our capacity for thinking to serve God, right? Those are all symbolic values. You know what Hirsch says very famously? He says, you know what? Women don't need them. They are so superior. And the Talmud says, bina yetera. Women have extra bina. There's some kind of spirituality that women have that men are basically, you'll excuse the word, I actually heard it used, I think my kids taught me this. Now it's got the opposite meaning. They're beasts. Nowadays, beast is a good word. Yeah, you go to the gym and work out. I got a beast at this table. I got several beasts at this table. Hey, Marie's a real beast, right? But it used to be in proper English. That was probably not a compliment to call somebody a beast. So Rav Hirsch says that men are basically beasts, and they need to be tamed by these different mitzvot, so they take control. But women are angelic, they're amazing, and they simply don't need these kinds of obligations. So those are the two famous explanations. Okay, now, what does it matter whether you're obligated in doing a mitzvah or not? So turn to the third page, please. This is a passage in the Talmud, and it's talking about the mitzvah to say Hallel, right? We say Hallel on certain holidays, occasions throughout the year, we say Hallel. These are a series of chapters from Psalms. So Talmud says the following. Mi shahaya eved o isha o katan makrin lo, makrin oto. One acharehen mashehin omrin. Okay. What would happen if you have an illiterate Jew? They didn't have art scroll Sidurim back then, right? With transliteration, it's like amazing, right? Everything is simple. He doesn't know any Hebrew. Doesn't know any Hebrew. So, but happens to be that his wife has a PhD in Hebrew. So she says to her husband, hubby, I'm going to help you say Hallel. I'm going to help you perform the mitzvah of saying Hallel. By the way, what kind of mitzvah is saying Hallel? It's a positive, time-bound mitzvah. So according to our principle, is the woman obligated to say Hallel? No. So, but she's going to help her husband because her husband's an ignoramus. Fine, maybe not his own fault, whatever. He didn't have a good Jewish education. So what does the Talmud here say? So the wife says, repeat after me. Beit, Yisrael, Me'am, Loez, right? Word for word, repeat. So that's how it's done. I mean, the guy doesn't know how to read and he doesn't know it by heart. And so his wife is helping him word for word. She says the word and he repeats it. Utihilo me'era. And you know what? And it should be a curse for him. Because why didn't he go to the adult education program and learn Hebrew? They had to rely upon somebody else to word for word to repeat. That's what it says here. Now, what about a different scenario? But what would happen if another man says, oh, you don't know how to read Hebrew? Okay, no problem. Okay, I'm going to say it out loud. You don't have to repeat. The person who does not read doesn't have to repeat, just says hallelujah, just answers. You know why? Because we have this principle that says one person can perform a mitzvah for another person if both have the same kind of obligation. So since one man is obligated to say Hallel and the other man doesn't know how to read Hebrew, I can say Hallel out loud. You'll listen to what I'm saying and you'll say hallelujah, and hallelujah, he fulfilled the mitzvah. He doesn't have to repeat each word. But if his wife were to do it, it's not enough to have her say the whole thing out loud and him to sit there and say hallelujah. It won't work. Why? Because she's actually not obligated to say hallel and he is. And you can only perform a mitzvah for another person if you both have the same obligation. Okay, so the notion that both have to have the same obligation to be able to perform mitzvah one for another is a very important principle in this. Okay. Now, let's apply all the principles that we learned just now to the issue of women reading the Megillah. Now, what did we already say in the Talmud? What did it say explicitly in Babylonian Talmud? Women are obligated to read the Megillah. Why? Even though it's a positive time-bound mitzvah, you would have thought that they're exempt. But because of this special consideration of Afhein Hayu Botones, that they were included in the same miracle, because Esther's the heroine, or because they were subject to the threat, whatever the explanation is, therefore they have an obligation as well. Now I want to ask you a question then. So based upon this, can a woman read the Megillah for the congregation? Based on what we said so far. Don't bring into this discussion anything extraneous that you may have read in the New York Times or anything like that. Just based on what we said so far.
The answer is yes.
Yes. Why? Because you could do a mitzvah for somebody else, right? Everybody's obligated to read it, but we don't do it that way. We don't have everybody sit there read to themselves. One person fulfills the mitzvah for everybody. And women are obligated just like men. So theoretically, according to this, you could have a woman who would come into the congregation and would read the Megillah for the entire congregation based upon this. Seems very straightforward. As a matter of fact, Rashi, Zeta of Rashbam. So when we had that tradition in the Talmud that said that women are included because they were included in the same miracle, they're obligated. So Rashi comments, Shechayavot b'mikra Megillah, they're obligated to read the Megillah, and he says explicitly, Uksherot likrota, Therefore, they are fit to read it, ulahotzi zecharim yedei chovatam, and can facilitate the fulfilling of the mitzvah for men, based on the principle we just said, because we're obligated just like men. And we have this principle, you can do a mitzvah for another person if you have the same obligation. We're done. Isn't this simple? That's it. Not so fast, Kowalski.
Spoken like a man who's got 3 daughters. Right?
Five.
He fought 5 daughters.
$5. Okay. Now, remember I said that we're going to see tonight the great principle of nothing is simple? Okay. Unfortunately, it is not so simple. Why? There is a work which is very authoritative and is called Tosefta. Tosefta. Now, I have to tell you what the Tosefta is. There is a very important collection of the oral traditions, which was recorded in the 2nd century of the Common Era, which is called the Mishnah. Now, there was an editing process because people used to just memorize all these traditions, all these legal traditions, these legal teachings. People just memorized them. There was a ton of them floating around in different versions of these traditions, etc. So what happened? There was a certain great rabbis up to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the 2nd century finally edited these teachings. But you know what? There were a lot of teachings that didn't make the final cut. Ask George Martin. Not everything is included in the final cut. Okay? Someone appreciated that. Okay. Now, what happened to the traditions that didn't make the final cut? They're called brightot. Brightot comes from an Aramaic word, bari bet reshud, which means outside. Why are they called outside? Because they were left outside of the final cutting process. They're outside of the Mishnah. That's where they're called brightot. External traditions, or however you want to translate it. There is a book which is a collection of brightot. That's called Tosefta. So Tosefta is a very important work because it comes from the same time as the Mishnah, and it includes traditions which are like the traditions of the Mishnah, but for some reason, the scholars who edited the book called Mishnah didn't include those particular traditions, the way they're formulated, in the Mishnah, but many of them were collected. They're quoted sometimes in the Talmud, and there's actually a whole book of them called Tosefta. It's divided up just like the Mishnah. The Mishnah is made out of 6 orders. So too the Tosefta, okay? And those subdivided into tractates, Masechtot, just like the Mishnah, okay? Well, there is a teaching in the Tosefta. Let's read it. Nashim v'avadim k'tanim peturim. Women, slaves, and minors, the Holy Trinity, they are exempt from the obligation to read the Megillah. Ve'ein motzi netarabim midei chovatan. And they cannot, therefore, fulfill the mitzvah of reading the Megillah for the public. Uh-oh, Cheerios, what just happened?
Contradicted the original.
Exactly. This is in exact contradiction to the passage we saw in the Babylonian Talmud that said women are included in the mitzvah of reading Megillah because they were included in the miracle. This says actually what we would have thought, right? Without that idea, because they were included in the miracle, therefore they're obligated. Without that, we should have thought that women are not obligated. And there is a Tosefta, there's a Breita included in the book called Tosefta, which says exactly that. Women are exempt. Oy vey. Now I'm confused. It's not so simple anymore. Now I want to take a look at another passage. This is a passage in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Now, this is a little bit ambiguous, but I want you to help me here. We're going to look at this passage. I want you to tell me if there's any indication based on this passage that women are obligated or not to read the Megillah. So this is the Talmud Yerushalmi, not the Bavli, which we saw before. Talmud Yerushalmi says the following. One must read the scroll before women and minors, for their fate was also in doubt. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who's the one who's quoted in the Babylonian Talmud, did so. He gathered his household and read before them the Megillah. Now, help me out here. Is there any indication based upon this whether or not women are obligated in reading the Megillah?
They're only obligated to hearing.
Okay,
too.
so that was a big leap there, and you
Yeah.
obviously read the New York Times. So,
No, if you read it to them,
oh, good.
they're not
Okay,
obligated to
so
read
so
it,
so
they're
there's some
obligated to hear it.
ambiguity here because it says, they're obligated in something because it says you should gather them together and read before them. You would have thought it should have said, if they're obligated, just like a man, it should have just said that women are obligated, so they should read. Why does it say one must read the scroll before them, right? And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi did that. He would gather together his household and read it for them, right? So you could interpret that as meaning that they have an obligation, but a little bit different. So, but we'll put that on hold, how it's different. I mean, Mark already alluded to perhaps one way of understanding that. But there's ambiguity in this, because you could say this is actually not a problem at all, because it could have very well been in ancient times that the women probably were not trained to be able to read it. So it could be that theoretically their obligation is exactly the same, but they didn't have the training to read it for everybody. So it says, since women are obligated just like men, but they're probably not going to know how to read it, so make sure that you read it for them. It could be that that's what that means. So we don't necessarily have to lose sleep over the Talmud Yerushalmi. But what do we have to lose sleep over? The passage in the what book? Help me out. Tosefta, thank you. Okay. So let's see how the later medieval scholars dealt with this contradiction. So Rabbi Menachem HaMeiri, great rabbi who lived in southern France in the 13th, 14th century, said the following. The primary approach, and it's really in English because I want to make sure we finish tonight. The primary approach is that we should not push aside the clear Talmud in our hands in favor of the Tosefta or the ambiguous Jerusalem Talmud. What's he saying? What does he mean when he says the clear Talmud in our hands? What's that a fancy way of saying?
When the
Babylonian Talmud. He says, let's even assume for a second that the Tosefta says, I mean, it actually does say it's about question. It says women are not obligated. The Talmud Yerushalmi is a little bit ambiguous. He says, I don't lose sleep over it because, you'll forgive me, the Babylonian Talmud trumps the authority of the Tosefta or of the Talmud Yerushalmi. That's just the way the system works. After all, my fine feathered friends, the Tosefta is a collection of what, as we explained a few minutes ago?
Stuff that got left out.
Stuff that got left out. So even though we don't say it's garbage, it got left out, God forbid, it's extremely important and authoritative. But when push comes to shove, it got left out for a reason. And we don't always know what the reason is, but it has a certain lesser authority than clear teachings that we do have in the Babylonian Talmud. Okay? So that's what the Meiri says. He says, there's a contradiction, but I'm not going to sleep over it because, as we said before, that the Babylonian Talmud is very clear about it, and it has more authority than the passage in the Tosefta or the ambiguous passage in the Talmud Yerushalmi.
So
Okay.
what do you mean by the Talmud in our hands?
Yes.
Really emphasize
What he means, because he means that's the more authoritative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now we have another way of dealing with this. Okay. Let's take a look at source number 15 here. This is from one of the great works from France in the 13th century. Even though women are obligated in reading the scroll, they should not read on behalf of men. Now, wait a second. Now I'm confused, because put aside the Tosefta, right? Because we could just say, well, it's only the Tosefta. It doesn't trump the Babylonian Talmud, right? But he says they are obligated, but they shouldn't read it in the shul for men. Why not? He says, don't compare it to lighting the Hanukkah candle. You know, that's another example, by the way, where men and women have equal obligations, lighting Hanukkah candles. Even though the Hanukkah candle is a positive time-bound mitzvah, but women are not, and women are obligated anyway, okay, for certain reasons. Maybe because they were central to the miracle as well. But in any case, there's no problem for a woman lighting a candle for men. Not at all. Nobody says it's a problem as far as I know. So why shouldn't Megillah, if they're obligated just like men, why shouldn't there be just a complete carte blanche for women being able to read for men? So here's a difference. He says, for reading the scroll is different is to be compared to the reading of the Torah. There's something special about reading the Megillah. It's like reading the Torah. Well, what does he mean? Well, there's a famous principle. And it's based upon a passage in the Talmud. Talmud says the following. When it comes to reading the Torah, theoretically, there's no difference between men and women. But our practice is not to have women have aliyot. Why? Because of kvod tzibur, because of the honor of the congregation. Nobody knows what that means, and don't ask me. At least right now. As soon as we go off air. Okay. But in any case, that's what the Talmud says. So this Rabbi Moshe of Kutzi says, you know what? We hold like the Babylonian Talmud, women are obligated just like men. But just like women are obligated by men, like men when it comes to reading the Torah, but we don't do it that way, according to Talmudic law, because of kvod tzibur, whatever that means, the honor of the tzibur, of the congregation. So reading the Megillah is similar to reading the Torah, and for the same reason, women shouldn't do it. Fine. So that's interesting. So even though theoretically speaking, they're obligated, but according to this particular text, it shouldn't be done because of kvod tzibur. Now there's another approach. So the Baal Halachot Gedolah, this is a very early halachic work, source number 17. There he says the following. Women, slaves, and minors are exempt from reading the scroll. Whoa! This is a 9th century source, perhaps. And he's saying women, slaves, and minors are exempt from reading the scroll. That sounds a lot like what? Doesn't sound like the Babylonian Talmud, does it? What does that sound more like? The Tosefta. Excellent, the Tosefta. So apparently this author here, this medieval author, very early medieval author, he is reconciling the Babylonian Talmud and the Tosefta. And he says the following. You know what? They're actually exempt from reading the scroll. They are obligated, however, to hear it. This is how this author understands there really was no contradiction between the Babylonian Talmud and the Tosefta. The Tosefta, when it says they're exempt, it means they're exempt from the mitzvah of reading it, but they are obligated to hear it. Okay, so based upon this, what would we say, bottom line, when it comes to can a woman read for the congregation based upon this theory?
No,
No, why not?
because their only obligation is hearing.
Right. In order to fulfill the mitzvah for somebody else, you have to have the same obligation. So since women are obligated to hear it, according to this, not to read it, so a man who has the obligation to read it has to have it fulfilled for him through someone who has the same obligation. Now, let me ask a different question. Can a woman read for another woman according to this? Absolutely, because they have the identical obligation.
Yeah,
Everybody follow that?
Not to
That
read
read
it
that.
for a man with what you
Right?
were just reading.
Because by reading it, that's how you hear it, right? So since women have obligation to hear it, if a woman reads it, right, she's hearing it, and then she can fulfill this for the other women in the room because they have the same obligation to hear it. Okay. So let's just do a very quick review of what we saw, and then we're going to get to the Shulchan Aruch, and that's going to be the end of something, not the end of existence. Don't get scared. Okay. One approach, which was based upon the Babylonian Talmud, is women are obligated just like men. Therefore, theoretically, women should be able to read for men, for everybody, not a problem. The only problem is that there is a Tosefta that says exactly the opposite, that women are exempt. Okay? What do we do with that? Well, one approach is to ignore it because it's of lesser authority than the Babylonian Talmud. Fine. Second approach, let's ignore the Tosefta and only hold like the Talmud. Bavli, but there's a catch. When the Talmud says women are obligated to read it, just like men, that's true theoretically. But there's something a little bit unseemly, whatever it is, called kvod tzibur, about women reading it for the congregation. So don't do it, even though theoretically it could be done, but don't do it. But by the way, according to that, could they read for other women? Definitely no problem, it seems. Third approach, the Baal Halachot Gedolot. He says the following. Remember that Tosefta? I don't have to reject it because there really is no contradiction. When the Tosefta said that they're exempt, it means they're exempt from the mitzvah of reading. When the Babylonian Talmud says that they're obligated, it means that they're obligated to hear. There was no contradiction between the two in the first place. What are the implications of that? That women could not fulfill the mitzvah for men because it's a different obligation, reading versus hearing, but they could fulfill the mitzvah for other women. Okay. Now let's read the Shulchan Aruch. Turn to the very last page, please. So what does the Shulchan Aruch say? Now the Shulchan Aruch, the 16th century law code, Rabbi Yosef Karo, he says the following. And I want you to tell me who he seems to be holding like, which approach. All are obligated in the reading of the Megillah, men and women. Both one who reads and one who hears from a reader fulfills his obligation as long as he hears it from one who is obligated in the reading. Let's stop there. What's he saying? Can a woman read the Megillah for the entire congregation? Why not?
Yes.
Just the first part I read. All are obligated in reading the Megillah, men and women, and both one who reads and one who hears from a reader fulfills obligation as long as he hears from one who is obligated in the reading.
Yeah.
Right? So if a 12-year-old read the Megillah, you couldn't fulfill your mitzvah because the 12-year-old is not bar mitzvah, right? So that wouldn't work. But as long as the person's obligated, like a woman or a man who's over 12 or 13, depending upon man or woman. Fine. So this sounds like which approach? Like Rashi, right? Rashi said explicitly, based upon the Talmud Bavli, rejecting the Tosefta, right? That women are obligated and therefore they can discharge the obligation of anybody because there are no difference between men and women in this respect. But then he goes on, he says, you know what? But there are those that say women do not fulfill the obligation for men. So, what's going on there? So he could be alluding to two different approaches, which we saw. One approach which said, well, they shouldn't fulfill their obligation for men because of kvod tzibur, the dignity of the congregation, whatever that means. Or the other approach we saw that said that women are obligated in a little different mitzvah, the mitzvah to hear, not to read. Okay? Now it's interesting, according to the Shulchan Aruch, and this is not unusual. It's not unusual for the Shulchan Aruch to quote two different opinions. So he starts by saying, here's the halacha, but there are those who say, generally speaking, though this is also a matter of debate, if you just intuitively, which opinion is the author of Shulchan Aruch more sympathetic with? I'm not saying this is for sure true, but just a simple reading.
Well, it's just simple reading is women are obligated to read, but that's the rule. But there are there's minority opinion that say no.
And therefore, what's the bottom line, Rabbi?
I
mean, based upon just this text. Don't tell me, no, not New York Times.
Right.
Okay. Which one does the author think is the primary opinion?
They read.
Okay. I would say we would say that, right?
Yeah.
That's what it seems like. Now, actually, the people who argue this, believe it or not, but that seems to be the approach, that women and men are obligated exactly the same way. And therefore, a woman could read for not only for other women, but could read for men. There's no difference. And there are actually ultra-liberal Orthodox congregations, believe it or not, that have women Megillah readers for the entire congregation. I mean, it's considered to be very risque in Orthodox circles, but there are a couple of congregations like that in the world.
And those congregations have no honor.
Was that an editorial statement? I detected sincerity in the tone of your voice. Okay, you may have lost your place in the world to come, or at least going to get a good beating when you get home. Okay, so now for Ashkenazim, the Shulchan Aruch itself is not sufficient. Why? Shulchan Aruch itself generally uses Sephardic sources. So that's why there's an important commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Moshe Isserles, known as the Ramah, he wrote like additions to the Shulchan Aruch, which bring Ashkenazi approaches. And he says the following. Look what he says here. Ramah adds, and there are those that say that if a woman reads for herself, she recites the blessing of not to read the Megillah, but lishmoa, to read the Megillah, to hear the Megillah, since she's not obligated to read. So there are some people who say that, wow, Rabbi Moshe Nisri seems to be taking pretty seriously which view? The view that the obligation is not identical for men and women. That's based upon the Tosefta, because the Tosefta says that they're exempt. But the Babylonian Talmud said that they're obligated. And we saw that the Baal Halachot Gedolot, they call them the Bahag for short, had said that there's really no contradiction. When the Tosefta said that they're exempt, that's because with regards to reading, they're exempt. When the Babylonian Talmud said they're obligated, that's with respect to hearing. Okay? So therefore, even when they're by themselves, Ramah says they shouldn't make the same blessing. You don't say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you, God, King of the verse, who has sanctified the commandments and commanded us to. We usually say, read the Megillah. But if women are having a Megillah reading, they should say to hear the Megillah, because that's actually the mitzvah. They're fulfilling a slightly different mitzvah. So based upon this, women could read it for each other, but they should not be reading it for the entire congregation or for a man because of the disparity in the definition of the mitzvah. You have to be obligated to the same mitzvah. Okay. So we just completed this whole analysis here. And bottom line. So bottom line is, as you can imagine, for whatever reason, I mean, traditionally, until recent times, the Megillah reading was done by men for the entire congregation. That could be because there are obviously important opinions that say either because of the differential in the definition of the mitzvah, right, hearing versus reading, or because of this notion of quoted boards compared to reading the Torah. Or it could just be sort of a sociological issue, or they could be related. I mean, I once had a congregant who was not Orthodox at all, but used to come to what is Rabbi in Westwood. She was an academic, and she said to me, she was a very liberal person, but not Orthodox at all. She said, this mechitza and all the kind of stuff that goes on here, it doesn't bother me at all, even though I'm a feminist and I'm not Orthodox. It's because, you know what? Men have this kind of primal need to bond with each other because or else they'll kill each other. And so, so there's like a men's club. They can like do fist pumps and, of course we don't do really fist pumps. What do we do? Yeshikoach! So she was looking at it from like the sociological point of view that the synagogue is sort of like this men's club. So it could be that in pre-modern times that synagogue basically was a kind of men's club of sorts. And the notion of a woman playing kind of a public role in a context like that would just almost in any society, not just Jewish society, would be like, women couldn't vote. I mean, the whole idea of a woman being prominent would be at a sort of center of attention in a public setting. Look what happened to Marie Antoinette. So that would be a little bit lost her head. So it could be a combination of that there are legitimate halachas and simply sociological reality. Now, with the advent of modernity and feminism and an increased desire to have women play more central roles in synagogue life, even within Orthodox circles. So there are many modern Orthodox synagogues where they do have a women's Megillah reading, but it would be women reading for women, which almost according to everybody here would be okay. Everybody would say it's okay. It happens to be, it's too complicated to get into, but there seems to be an opinion that that shouldn't be done either. But that, in terms of the major sources, it seems like it's not a problem according to anybody, okay? Then you do have, like I said, sort of the far left, or however you want to characterize them, that just really a very small handful, probably in the world, of Orthodox synagogues that have a woman reading for the entire congregation. And it's not crazy from a theoretical point of view, because according to the way Rashi understood the Talmud, and according to the way Rabbi Yosef Karner, Shulchan Aruch, his first opinion, that's actually could work, halachically speaking. Yes. You know what I'm going to do now, just because I'm going to go off air, and then you can start screaming. Anybody who didn't like anything I said, you can throw tomatoes at me. But have a very good life, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that and weren't utterly confused. Peace be upon you.